the greatest of the slasher flicks. The nostalgia. The absolute finest. Greatest slasher ever made. The scariest movie of all time. Horror and me go together like chlorine and bleach. It never really gets along, and they're a bad idea to put together in an elementary school. Now, a few years back, I was trying to expand what movies I watched. What I noticed is after a while, I hadn't watched much in the way of horror. Up to that point, the only actual horror related things I watched was Goosebumps, creepypasta readings, those creepy top 10 videos of like top 10 things that were found on YouTube. Number 7 will be scary. But other than that, I didn't really engage much with horror. Because when you are watching YouTube late at night in second grade and can see countdowns of monsters and murderers, who needs to watch a Serbian film? So that fateful October, I decided to start watching a few horror staples that I had heard of, and some more recent things that had come out. I focused on the more popular side of horror just because there was a lot of movies out there, even to this day, that you know them because they've been parodied so many times, but still haven't watched them because I will watch a 8-hour documentary about a speed run I never heard about before. But sit down for an hour and a half for a movie? No way, man. So came those fateful nights in which I would watch slashers and horror movies with the lights turned off. Or at least I started with slashers and then promptly wrote off horror as stupid, dumb, lame, not good, and for lobotomites. But why was that? While I watched one horror film first, I want to skip to my second one. I went out of my way to watch a classic indie film made by an unknown director, Halloween. Now, the first time I watched it, I was with a friend, and the only reason I finished it is because we were having fun riffing on the movie. And even recalling and skimming it for this video has inflicted me with bouts of narcolepsy. Now, why didn't I like this movie? It's very simple. It's boring. Halloween is a horror movie if your time to run a mile is over 20 minutes. So it's an American horror movie. When we start the film, we get a cold open of young Mike who gets a little too close to stabbing his family. And we cut to what might be the funniest scene of any of the films I'll discuss. So Tweedledee and Tweedledum talk about seeing Mike decades later. So I'm not an expert on insane asylums, but I'm 90% sure they don't just have them free range in the middle of the night during rainstorms. So the two Stooges really think there's no way into the asylum, so what do you think you do? So because of this comedy of errors, they are carjacked by Mike, who has to be an eldritch god. He learned how to drive, window repair, and navigation, all while being locked up in an insane asylum, and apparently going non-verbal. And after that, the slog begins. Each series of scenes follows the following structure. Mundane things with characters talking about nothing really important, or like, wow, there's like some, bad things going on. We get camera angles and shots showing that Mike's stalking, and then the stalky looks as he's gone, and we get very brief, like, glimpses of Mike as he's just kind of, staring like he's confused at the lunch line. And then Mike may or may not chase. Don't count on him doing the whole chasing part within the first hour of the film. Once you realize the structure, you know it's going to be boring. Now, I do think this can be effective. Tension to build up is going to be in a lot of horror movies, but my issue is that it isn't paid off. You are blue-balled for 15 minutes and nothing happens. To the point where it just got annoying to hear the theme for no payoff. Even when he does kill people, it's usually pretty underwhelming. I understand it's supposed to make him an unstoppable force and intimidating, but honestly it was more funny than anything. Usually because they are all panicked and everything, and you just got this guy being a competitive power walker trying to stab people. In my opinion, the ending didn't really do anything to make it much better. So after Mike does his CSGO surfing gameplay, he gets shot and then gets back up. And then the detective guy is like, oh my gosh, he's evil incarnate. Now, the director was probably thinking, wow, evil is eternal and invades the mundane. Its eternal nature will haunt humanity as long as we live. In reality, my thought was there any point in the series of scenes that implied anything supernatural was going on? Like, he has some improbable traveling, but that's not explicitly paranormal. It made me just kind of confused and also just kind of wrote off the movie after I watched it. My biggest issue is just the lack of payoff for anything that happens. There's so much tension and then just goes nowhere, and it ends up being more boring than it is scary. Because when a horror movie is doing nothing, oh, it's just gonna build up the scares, when no, sometimes it's just being boring. Circling back to the first movie I watched beforehand, it was the movie Terrifier. Now, it does do something better than Halloween. Stuff actually happens. Now, the acting is worse, the set looks a bit cheaper, and the music is non-existent. And it even had a similar ending, but for all that to equate to a 3 out of 10, and why I would rewatch Terrifier any day over Halloween, is the fact that things are paid off. Terrifier is gore slop, and it doesn't pretend to be much more. Art is a sadistic serial killer, and the gore and violence shows that. There's a lot of character to his actions, more so than just going up and stabbing people. And I would actually be a lot more scared if he was real over nonverbal Mike over there. When you tell me Mike is an insane serial killer and an unstoppable force, and he's shown to never want to run, and he's outsmarted by a teen girl, I'm unimpressed. Art kills more people, needs to be run over and shot to be put down, and while I have about the same reservations about him being paranormal, at least there's something there that's implied by the end. Believe it or not, after watching these two masterpieces, I really didn't watch horror for a bit, at least for a few weeks before trying to find something more. With one slasher I thought was awful and the other I thought was passable slop, surely the next slashers had to be great. I'm going to skip past my review of Scream. I found it boring, not particularly entertaining, and it didn't frustrate me nearly as much as Halloween. I might make a video in the future about Scream if you guys are interested, but I did want to talk about the highest rated slasher movie that I have watched. It's a 5 out of 10. Friday the 13th. At first glance, you would think I would be bored with this movie given my complaints about the last ones, and it does have some of the issues I did with the other slashers, but there is a key difference and payoff. It opens with an introduction of a counselor girl, and I was under the impression that of course she won't die, she's the important main character. It even teases an escape, only to have her die really early on, and I was immediately more engaged considering we had actual things happening to people that mattered. Now, the setup goes on a little bit long, but we're followed up by that when it actually gets to night, and there's enough tense scenes and kills are coming consistently enough that I didn't really have much of an issue. And it was about the halfway mark where I kind of started falling off of it. There were some stalking scenes where very little happens, and while not as bad as Halloween, it was on its way to 3 out of 10 hell. What I enjoyed was the introduction of Pamela Voorhees, and what I found to be a more interesting background of a killer, but in tandem, it added intrigue, so the last minute addendum that I had issues with the other films didn't really factor in here, because it came early enough that I felt like it could be additive to the story, but not late enough that I felt like it kind of just rushed into there at the end. And with that, it is here where Friday the 13th gets the coveted title of reaching 5 out of 10. Now, I'm going to add my rating scale on the screen right now, just in case you want to look at it. Basically, I think it's slightly above average at best. Now, it was after this I once again took a long break from watching horror movies, but I came back, not at slashers, but something different. And I want to talk about one of those horror movies that breaks out of 5 out of 10 hell. Something psychological. Possession is a psychological horror movie made by an insane director from Poland. The core idea of this film, it is a couple's descent into madness as they are going through a divorce. It starts out normally enough. Mark learns his wife wants a divorce, they already have a kid, and it's set in the late years of the Cold War, in a divided Germany their lives begin to spiral. I don't really want to explain much more, as the movie is great, and I would highly encourage anyone who's interested and likes psychological horror to watch it. The actors in this film exaggerate actions, but when I was initially watching it, it came off as something to be laughed at. As the topics grew darker, and their actions did too, it becomes more depraved and manic. The range of motion the actors are consistently using to express their feelings heightens the intensity of anything they do. Well, certainly in real life we don't convulse, wave, and move like the actors do when arguing. It can feel like that, and it feels far more intense, and I think the film captures that masterfully. A descent into madness, a divorce, and the evil that springs from these imperfect people. It's lined with the director's personal experiences, and it really shines through in how down to earth some of the slower scenes are. Some of the scenes that are a bit more quiet, like coming home to a neglected child, or the contemplation and agony, the heartbreak. Those things really shine through, especially given how frantic this movie is and how fast the camera work is. The times in which it's a lot more subtle end up shining a lot better. What scared me more is the broader ideas hit on by the film that linger even now on occasion. It was after watching this film for the first time I realized why I didn't find slashers all that scary. What I'm looking for in horror is something to stick with me and reflect on my own life. But most people aren't going to be chased by an evil clown. But the breakdown of relationships and becoming worse off at the end is all too believable. There is one horror movie I liked more, but this one's more important to me for helping me to understand horror as a genre and what I personally enjoy out of it. And maybe that can wait for another time. I would highly recommend Possession if you're fine with the more intense subject matter that the movie touches on, and maybe even Terrifier if you really like gore. And while I don't like slashers all that much, in the future I may try to watch a few more if there's some I've missed, and maybe one of them can make it beyond a 5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, maybe even hype the video, but until next time, this has been Joca-Cola, out.